Broadcasting live from somewhere underneath the ground. Archaeology News. The news you can trust.
Okay, for today's episode, we're going to be spending some time in Roman Britain. Now, why is that? My specialty is actually early medieval. And in order to understand what happened after Rome, which is the early medieval time, you have to understand what happened at the end of Rome. You see, because it's become increasingly clear that when Rome sort of collapsed, it wasn't like everything changed overnight. In fact, Rome went through some difficult times starting in the 4th century and right up until it fell. So in fact, in Britain, on the periphery of the empire, the 3rd and 4th centuries, it was pretty much sliding into shit as it was on a lot of the periphery of the empire. And that was a process. It wasn't an event. It's not like all of those Roman Britons who, they were Romanized, threw off their togas and ran for the hills. It's not like all those legionnaires who had been granted land in Britain suddenly left too. It's not like all of those Christians, because remember, the empire became Christianized by Constantine the Great. It's not as if they all just gave up their religion overnight. So that transition from Roman to medieval was a long and steady process. Anyway, you get the picture. This is why I've been studying Rome a lot lately. Now, the story that I'm going to share with you today, sourced as it was from an academic paper, is, well, I'm just going to come out and say it.
Fake news.
The fake news.
Fake news.
And based on the subject matter, you might actually think you made a mistake and landed in the wrong segment, but I assure you this is archaeology news, not archaeology porn. Because the subject we're talking about today is maybe, sorta, kinda, a wooden Roman dildo. That actually wouldn't work for archaeology porn because that would be taking it too literally. But this is fake news. So this segment can actually serve as a sort of an archaeological media literacy course. Because if you're watching this podcast, you probably read quite a bit of archaeology news. And there's a lot of clickbait out there, but this one actually was featured in a lot of legitimate publications, and it originated from an academic paper. So how did we get here? This object comes from Vindolanda, which was a Roman fort just south of Hadrian's Wall. Now, Rome had built Hadrian's Wall to keep out the barbarians. Right now, it's situated in northern England. Over time, at times it was the border between England and Scotland, but that's where it came from. And this fort was built in the late 1st century, so actually pretty shortly after the Romans got to Britain. They made their first invasions and took it over in, I think it was the 40s. So a few decades after they arrived. Now, this site is a gold mine for artifacts because of the unique preservation conditions there. You see, the fort was rebuilt, I think, at least 9 times, and each time the new structure sealed what was below it, and it was in very damp conditions. Now, this created an anaerobic environment, so no oxygen, which, as you know, is very good for preservation. Think back to those bogs, right? Those peat bogs. They have anaerobic conditions, which is why you can even find human bodies preserved there for thousands of years. And the fort lasted a long time. It seems to have only been abandoned in the 5th century, the middle 5th century, which is actually quite a few decades after Rome supposedly left Britain. And because of that long life period and of the fort and the anaerobic conditions, there have been lots of organics found there. In fact, over 2,000 wooden objects have been found on the site. Perhaps my favorite example is a series of small writings called the Vindolanda tablets. These were written on small, thin wooden leaves, and they detail the goings-on of the fort, the daily happenings, troop movements, letters from the soldiers to their families. And there's one particularly noteworthy example, Tablet 291, which was written by a lady named Claudia, the wife of the commander of a nearby fort. And she was inviting her friend Sulpicia to her birthday party. So yeah, 2,000 years ago, on the edge of civilization, they had birthday parties. So these things are really a wealth of knowledge about daily life in Roman Britain. Incidentally, Tablet 291 is one of the first known writings of Latin by a woman, so it's historically important. The object we're discussing today, the Roman dildo, well, it was found in a context. Remember, context in archaeology means a layer of archaeology. It was found in a context that had stuff dated from about 160 to 200 AD. And it was found alongside 837 other objects. So like I said, this was kind of a gold mine for archaeological finds.
I'm sitting on a gold mine!
It looks just like a dildo, and at 16 centimeters or 6 inches long, it's certainly sort of the right lifelike size. And we do know from literature at this time that there were phalluses that were used for sexual pleasure, not just religious purposes. Now, incidentally, these were often made of leather, and they were often made by shoemakers. So it kind of makes sense that our dildo was found in the context where you have waist leather and shoes. So that adds some backing to the story. However, this would be the only wooden phallus ever found in Roman Britain. And especially if they're arguing that it's a dildo, you can kind of understand why you wouldn't want that to be made out of wood. I mean, splintering? Moreover, the wear patterns on the wood, ash to be exact, actually indicate that it was very lightly used, with just some wear on both ends and a little bit in the middle, which might indicate the place it was gripped. But you could even see the original tool markings on, so it was not weathered, it was indoors. And how could you tell that it might have been worn from human contact? Well, when wood is repeatedly touched by human hands, it becomes kind of glossy, like a sheen. So that's how you could tell if it was really handled or not. Now, if we take this at face value, then what we've got is the only wooden phallus from the Roman world. But let's look at this a bit more critically now. This story originated from a paper written in 2023. That was by two archaeologists, one from the University College Dublin, the other from the University of Newcastle. And they were actually re-examining this object, which had first been discovered in 1992, but it was cataloged as a darning tool. Darning is like knitting, something to do with knitting. Now, the authors are arguing that it is not a darning tool, it's something else. And believe it or not, the dildo explanation is only one of the three things they come up with, and they actually don't have a specific finding, but instead they go through the evidence for or against. So the evidence for is the following, just to recap. One, the wear patterns on the wood, the size and shape of the object, the fact that it was in the context of what appear to be shoemaking type of things. So that's basically the evidence for the fact that it was used for sexual pleasure. I think at this point it's important to point out one thing that you probably don't know, which is that the Romans were actually obsessed with penises. They put them on everything. There were penises on statues that you rubbed for good luck, like in the vestibule of a building. There were rings, there were pendants, there were lamps, there were carvings on floors and walls, there were wind chimes. You name it, the Romans put a penis on it. There were penises of stone, there were penises of ceramic, there were penises of metal, and now, potentially, penises of wood. And there were probably other wooden ones, because remember, wood rots. Those other materials, they don't. This was literally a religion, as the disembodied phallus was actually supposed to be a sign of good luck and to ward off bad luck, particularly the evil eye. I guess fight the evil eye with old one eye? And yes, like in many cultures, the phallus symbolized fertility, but that actually wasn't the primary understanding in Rome. That was just one of the meanings. And believe it or not, when shown as a pendant or on jewelry, the phallus in Latin, actually the name was fascinum, which is the root of the word fascinate or fascinating. So think about that the next time you tell your teacher something is fascinating. Now, you probably haven't heard of this because, let's be frank, this is not something family-friendly museums want to draw people's attention to. As you know, I'm a museum junkie. I've been to hundreds of museums and many with Roman stuff in it. And the only place I can ever remember this being featured was in Pompeii itself, because it was literally covered with phalluses, and also in the Archaeological Museum of Naples. Other than that, I can't really recall seeing this. In fact, at the Vindolanda site alone, there were 13 representations of phalluses found. My favorite was one found just last year, which was a bit of graffiti carved in stone. And it was calling a man named Secundius a shitter, and had a penis next to it, I guess, to mock the guy. Now, that actually reminds me distinctly of some graffiti I would see in school in the bathroom stalls in like middle school and high school. So I guess some things don't change. In Rome, the penis wasn't always a good thing. So I guess in that sense, even though it was usually positive, the symbol of the phallus in Rome wasn't totally unambiguous. So if someone showed you a phallus, you might look at him kind of cockeyed. Okay, I know that was terrible. But the point is that there is some ambiguity here, because it had many, many different meanings, functions, and representations in ancient Rome. So we're going to go through some of those other alternatives now, other than this phallus being a dildo. Okay, so what this means is the object actually could have been a bunch of different things. It's unique because it's wood and it's about life size. But they do consider two other alternatives in particular. One is as a phallus-shaped pestle, as in a mortar and a pestle used for grinding herbs, for example. The other is as sort of a penis that could be inserted into the base of a statue, which was actually very common back then. As for the pestle idea, there's no indication on it through discoloration that it was used for grinding anything, whether that be for food or medicine or perfumes, but that might not have survived the ages. It was the right size, and I guess the grip, it seems to have possibly functioned that way. But there's no other specific evidence, except some circumstantial evidence. Now, this is going to get a little convoluted, but there was a statue of Priapus found on site. Now, Priapus in ancient Rome was the god of fertility, who was often depicted with a giant schlong. Gardens actually also had a association with fertility, and therefore Priapus was also the god of gardens. So then in that sense, because almost anything that you're using in a mortar or pestle is kind of a herb or something natural, it would make sense that that actual symbolism was used for a pestle. So that's one other alternative. And that marries, again, a sort of a hypothetical with the function and use of the object in your own hands, which is called phenomenology, how something is sort of experienced and functions on a daily level. Of course, the fact that they found a statue of Priapus on site leads one to believe that there probably were other statues like that. They were very common in Rome. And often at the base of those statues, there would be penises, which were either carved into the statue or a slot that you would insert a penis into. And I guess people would kind of rub it while they were walking by for good luck. And the shape of the object lends itself to that the base, which is not, which has some signs of being handled, if that slotted into the stone and rubbed it, that might be a reason for the wear on that end of the phallus. So this is a possibility, and also the fact that it wasn't weathered means it very likely could have been inside on one of those statues and not handled that much. However, all of that was just too complicated, and the idea of having found an ancient dildo was just too juicy for even the most respectable news organizations to resist. So very soon, this headline was in hundreds of publications all over the world. It was everywhere and it became a fact. Now, to be fair, I couldn't track down the original press release because there were so many Google results for this, given how it exploded in the press. And I wasn't sure what institution the press release would have come from exactly. But I've actually noticed that lately a lot of archaeological press releases have become a little bit more clickbaity. And the reason for this is all over the world, but especially in Britain, archaeology as a discipline is starved for cash. You know, even some of the very good archaeological departments at universities are facing severe cutbacks, and some eliminated altogether, like that at the University of Sheffield, which is a very good program. So I think from certain people's perspectives, and it makes sense that if you can get archaeology in the press, if you can get eyeballs on the archaeology, that's a good thing, even if the stories are a little bit dubious. So I do understand that thinking. Now, since the story was published, some discerning readers actually came out and suggested that this is a sewing implement called a drop spindle that's actually still in use today. So it was good to see that some people didn't buy into all the hype. So there you have it. I hate to disappoint because I know we started out talking about a dildo and ended up by saying, well, I don't know, it's complicated, we'll never know for sure. But hey, that's archaeology, baby. It's always complicated. Now, no one asked me, but I think there's only one way to settle this one for sure. I think someone's got to take it home and do a little experimental archaeology on it. I'm just saying. Well, there you have it. That's the archaeology news. And who said archaeology was boring? Hey, if you like what you heard, give me that thumbs up below, hit that bell to subscribe, or if you want to support more independent archaeology content, consider contributing to my Patreon, where you can enjoy some exclusive members-only benefits and other goodies. Until the next dig.